for the screech. Well, my name is Ronald Shapiro, and I'm one of the rabbis here at Congregation Shalom, and on behalf of our congregation, and also on behalf of the Nathan and Esther Peltz Holocaust Education Resource Center, it is a great honor to welcome you to this significant and extraordinary event because of the story which it portrays. And from the Resource Center, to thank Shay Pilnick and Betty Krastowski and all of the people who are in leadership positions there to bring this significant type of story to the community. Here within a synagogue is significant too, because each of their lives are soulful. At our congregation, we have two quotes upon this bema wall. The two quotes, one from the Bible and one from the Talmud, comprised of 36 letters. 36 is one of the mystical numbers of Jewish life. It's 2 times Chai, 2 times 18. But there was a legend that came from Jewish tradition which said there are 36 righteous people who live in this world at any one given time. They are so caring and so thoughtful and so respectful and so open to others that because of their goodness, God keeps the world going with all of the mean-spiritedness, prejudice, discrimination, hatred, with all of that which assails us within our society. God keeps the world going because of the 36. Nobody knows if they're one of the 36. You may be some of the 36. The legend goes on to say, since nobody knows he or she is one of the 36 righteous ones, if everyone acted as if they were one of the 36 righteous ones, wouldn't this be an extraordinary world in which to live? That is our mission, that each human being is bestowed with the spark of God. And each human being should know it, so that we can confer the best, the most beautiful upon the world in which we live. So it is in that spirit that we welcome you, and also in the spirit of great magnanimity to call upon Carrie Altman, who has worked so hard to devote herself to this project. And by her enlightened manner, I think you are one of the 36, Carrie. You are. You're caring and sweet, and you feel in your heart a devotion for the human family. And you are so appropriate to initiate this program. So we call upon Carrie Altman and thank her for the great work she does.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Shapiro. I'm one of the proud co-chairs of this event, along with my friend, Dr. Shai Pilnick, the Executive Director of the Nathan and Esther Peltz Holocaust Education Resource Center here in Milwaukee. Thank you all for being here today. We all know that one of the greatest lessons learned from the atrocities of the Holocaust is to respect and to appreciate individual differences. Today's speaker has spoken all over the world sharing this same message. Angela Schluter is the daughter of Edith Hahn Beer, the author of The Nazi Officer's Wife. It was Angela who encouraged her mother to write her story, and it is Angela who continues to share her story with audiences throughout the world. As a matter of fact, after Angela's visit in Milwaukee, she will travel to Washington, D.C. to speak at the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum, where 800 documents of her mother's are housed. Arts and Entertainment was so impressed by this compelling story that they produced a documentary narrated by Susan Sarandon and Julia Ormond. Please join me and focus on the screen.
August 1942. A young woman boards a train in Vienna, bound for Munich, a city celebrating one Nazi victory after another. She carries a suitcase, a book of poetry, and nothing else. Her papers say she is 20-year-old Greta Denner, a full-blooded Aryan who can travel freely in the Reich. But she is not who she says she is. Sewn into the spine of the book are her true identity papers. She is, in fact, Edith Hahn, a Jewish fugitive wanted by the Gestapo.
I had to forget what I have learned. I didn't want to have any questions about myself, about my education, about my life or anything.
On that train to Munich, Edith Hahn willed herself to disappear. Now, as Greta Denner, she sped toward an uncertain future in the heart of Hitler's Reich. She could not imagine the life she would lead, the role she would have to play, the woman she would become.
I have the feeling I had a wonderful youth. I have the feeling that I had everything and I didn't lack anything and I was very, very happy.
Edith was born in Vienna on January 24th, 1914, on the eve of the First World War. Her father, Leopold, went off to fight with the Austro-Hungarian army. When he returned home, the city he knew as a boy was no longer the seat of empire. He and his wife, Clotilda, set out to build a life together with their 3 daughters, Edith, Mimi, Hansi. These were the Hahns of Vienna.
I would like to read a short paragraph that was written by Edith to her daughter, Angela Schluter. Finally, this book owes everything to Angela Schluter, my daughter, for it was the loving spirit of her inquiry, her need to know, her search for the strange, miraculous past that inspired me to tell the story at last. Please join me with a warm welcome for an internationally renowned speaker and my friend, Ms. Angela Schluter.
Thank you. Shalom, Chaverim. Hello, friends. My name is Angela, and I am the only Jewish child, to have been born in an ordinary Nazi hospital, welcomed by a room full of Nazi doctors, another child for Hitler. But they didn't know. did not know that my mother was a Jew and that I am a Jew. My mother, born 1914, grew up in Vienna, happy as anything. It was a happy household. It was a good marriage, and she was good at school. She went to university. She studied law. She loved it. And then everything went well. And then Hitler marched in. And with that day, everything, but everything changed. The humiliation of the Jews. The Jews had to hand in their bicycles, their radios. They all had to move into the ghetto, which was, of course, full. Whole families lived in one room. And with the day he marched in, no child was allowed to go to school, and no Jew was allowed to work. So, they didn't have work, they were not allowed to shop, they didn't pay taxes, of course. They lived on handouts. My mother and her mother, Clotilde, had to move into the ghetto, which is the other side of the Danube River. My grandfather had died in 1936. He had a heart attack. The two other sisters, my mother's sisters, had managed to leave and had gone to Palestine. She could have left, and she didn't, because of her boyfriend. Joseph Rosenfeld, called, and the diminutive in Vienna for Joseph is Pepe, as Bill is for William here. So for Pepe, they were together for 10 years, soulmates. Soulmates like, well, I can only wish for. She thought they belonged together. He wasn't quite so sure. So they were living in the ghetto on scraps. The rumors, they were terrified. It was a horrible life. Horrible. And then, one day, the Gestapo told them they had all those Jews with H, because they did everything alphabetically. H had to go to the Gestapo headquarters next morning. And there were many. Her name was Han. There were many with H. It was a boiling hot day, and the queues were round the block up the street. And they waited, and they waited. And then the trucks came with the soldiers, and the trucks came, and the soldiers jumped off. And they went along the line of Jews. You. This way. And they chose the young and the strong. My mother was chosen. Her mother, Clotilde, was chosen. And my mother said to the young soldier, no, this woman, her mother, she's not a Jew. She's only come to make sure that I'm here. No. And Clotilde was allowed to go. Those chosen were taken to an office. They were made to sign papers that they would work. The next day, they were to be at the station, and they were given a list of what they were allowed to take with them. Work, apparently 6 weeks. And they were taken by train to somewhere near Leipzig, in the middle of Germany. And the farmers came and they said, they need 6, they need 8, they need 2, and they chose. So my mother was on a farm. Now my mother, like me, she was a city girl. Me, if I see concrete in front of me, I'm happy. I'm happy. And there she was. She was just like me, and on a farm. Now, my mother was never one to ask permission for all sorts of things, because she also packed a little camera. Her father had given her a box camera, and she put a film in, and she packed it. And when she got there, a few days later, she didn't ask permission. She just took pictures. We still have those pictures. And they are unbelievably valuable. From a slave labor camp, you see the girls, the slave laborers, bent over in the fields. You see all the fields, you see the barn, you see the people. Even the overseer. Either he didn't know or he didn't mind. Those are now amongst the papers in the Holocaust Museum in Washington. Also, she worked an 80-hour week on very little food. When she left, she weighed under 100 pounds, which is not a lot. But every day, she wrote to her boyfriend, Pepe. She wrote twice a day. She wrote 3 times a day. We have about 300 of those letters. Original letters describing life on a slave labor farm. Unbelievably priceless to every historian, also in the museum. She wrote very interesting letters. Every detail of what she ate, what they talked about, how she was living, the barn they had to sleep in, everything. His letters back were not so interesting. They were a bit superficial, yes? She wrote on scraps of paper, she wrote in pencil, whatever she had. She was allowed to post letters. The first letters the overseer read, but they were so boring, he couldn't be bothered. So they got through, and Pepe kept them. After the harvest, asparagus, beans, potatoes, whatever, she was then sent to a paper factory. They kept her in slave labor for 13 months. She never saw her mother again. She was devastated. Now, in this paper factory, they made packaging, so you had to put the cardboard, shove it in, and the knives would come down, but you had to take your hand away in time. There were people at the factory who'd had their fingers cut with these sharp, and it was loud. There were all these machines. Later in life, she became very deaf, and she put it down to the noise of these machines. So the effect, even in old age, was still there. She was then, after 13 months, she was due to be deported east. So the Gestapo demanded her return. She and 5 other girls had a permission to use the railways. Jews were not allowed to use the railways or the main roads, to even walk down the main roads. But and we still have that permission. And she had to wear a yellow star. September 1941, this started. She and the other girls decided that when they got on the train, they wouldn't know each other. They just wouldn't, they would separate, and they would not acknowledge each other. They would take the star off. They didn't like wearing the star. And this is what happened. She took the star off. There were no questions asked. She does not know what happened to the other girls. They never ever saw each other again. She got back. She had told Pepe which train she was coming on so that he could meet her. And he did come to the station, but he also brought his mother, which was not exactly what she wanted. His father had died long before, his Jewish father, and he had a Catholic mother, and she was very, very worried about her son. And he wasn't on the list, and she tried to get him through. As a mother, I can understand this. But it wasn't what she wanted. She hadn't seen him for over a year, and there was his mother. Oh dear. It was not usual at the time in Vienna to hold hands or to kiss on the street or whatever. So what they used to do was they'd go to the railway station and have a cuddle. Like people departing, like you cuddle people going on holiday. So they used to use the railway station. Now, she had been given a piece of paper, A4, with a list of foodstuffs and everything, to go to the Gestapo and give them the paper and collect the food. She knew that once she went to the Gestapo, they wouldn't let her go. Her mother had been deported 10 days earlier. So she never went to the apartment. She didn't go to the Gestapo. She wanted to stay with Pepe. So she thought, I'll go tomorrow. And tomorrow came, one more day. And the Gestapo were looking for her. She was in the outskirts of town. She washed in the public bathhouse. She was very, very careful not to go where people would recognize her. And another day with Pepe. And she was sometimes allowed to sleep. Her friend had a shop on the Gantnerstrasse, for those who know Vienna, for souvenirs, and they had a little back room. Sometimes she could sleep there. And then she remembered. She remembered Minna. This was a young girl, 18, also in slave labor, working on the farm, who'd already been taken and deported. And she had said, when you're in Vienna, we will keep in touch through a woman called Maria Niederall. Now, Maria Niederall was a big Nazi. She was so big in the party, she had been given a Jewish shop. It was some sort of road haulage. Of course, she had no idea of road haulage. So the Jewish secretary had been kept on. That was Minna, before Minna was in the slave labor. So my mother remembered, and then she went to see Maria Nida. It couldn't be worse than the Gestapo. No. She went to see Maria, and Maria welcomed her and sat her down and gave her coffee and cake and was nice to her. Now, my mother hadn't seen coffee since before Hitler marched in. The stuff they got was made of acorns. And cake was a dim memory. Oh, and it was so nice to sit there, and this woman was so nice to her. And she said, come again, Edith, come again. So the next day, she went again. And Maria looked at her. She went to the telephone. Hansel, that is the diminutive for Johann, which is John, so that she must have known this person very well. Hansel, I have a young girl here who's lost her papers. Can you help her? Obviously, he must have said yes, because she said, go to this address, the Fleischmanngasse number 9, go now, go immediately, do exactly what the man tells you. She had no idea what was going to happen. But she went. Couldn't be worse than the Gestapo, after all. So she went. 2 boys, 10 and 12 years old, opened the door. They were his sons. On the door was his plaque. He was an SS officer, Johann Plattner, and underneath, expert for racial affairs. Oh, my God. She nearly died. But Maria had said, so she went in. He was in full uniform. Flags, swastikas everywhere, pictures and busts of Hitler everywhere. Oh! But she went. I once asked her, what did this man look like? He was a giant. No, he couldn't have been a giant. But her memory, her terror, she couldn't remember anything about him, except he was enormous. That was how terrified she was. He sat her down, didn't ask her name, and he told her exactly what to do in great detail, how to get a new identity to get round the laws and not be deported. It took 10 minutes, and she was out. He didn't ask her name, he asked nothing. She was in a daze, and she went back to Pepe and her friend who had this shop, Christel, and she told them what the man had said. Christel turned round, and this man had said she must find a girlfriend who will go to the police and tell them she had been boating on the Danube and her handbag had dropped in the water. And in the handbag was her birth certificate, her baptismal certificate, all sorts of ID, all sorts of papers. Now, ladies, I carry my lipstick in my handbag. For sure not my birth certificate. Oh, yes. Anyway, Christel turned round. She didn't have to be asked. She was 21 years old. I'll do it. No problem. I'll go. No problem. 21 years old. She knew exactly that she was taking her own life in her hands. She was risking the life of her entire family and friends. She still said, no problem, I'll do it, just like that. And she did. She went to the police and she told them the story. Plattner, the SS officer, had said it had to be the water. I mean, they couldn't dredge the whole Danube. Yes, if it was a fire or the dogs, she'd have to bring bits. And yes, she fluttered her eyelashes at the police, and lo and behold, they issued her with a new set of ID papers. So she had one, she had two sets, both original. No, they weren't forged. One she gave to my mother, one she kept. So my mother became Christine Maria Margarete Denner. Now, she didn't want to call herself Christine because of the girl. She called herself Margarete, shortened to Grete. Now, the man had said, because food was and clothing was rationed, that two people of the same name couldn't be in the same city because of the rations. So she had to leave that night, overnight, so she could sleep. She took the train to Munich. When she got out in Munich, she thought she was on a different planet. This was wonderful. There were laughing faces everywhere. These soldiers who had leave all went to Munich. And there was food, and there was wine, and the restaurants were open. The opera was open. The ballet, everything. She couldn't believe it. In the morning, she got a newspaper and she found herself a room. She, of course, had very little money. And this was in Deisenhofen, which is one of the outskirts. Now it's part of Munich. Against 3 days of sewing. Now, my grandmother was a master dressmaker, and she also sewed, as I do, and my son does as well. So we're generations of dressmakers. So she was in Deisenhofen, and she did the sewing that she was supposed to. She couldn't stay there all the time. The people would have asked, why doesn't this young girl go out? So she went to Munich every so often. Of course, the soldiers spoke to her, and she had dates. And one day she went to the Maximilianeum, where there was an art exhibition. Hitler, his favorite paintings and sculptures were there. There was something to do, somewhere to go. So she went round. She didn't like it. And she was tired. She was undernourished. She was always undernourished. So she sat on a bench, as one does. And a young man came and sat next to her, as they do. And he nudged closer, and she nudged away, and he was closer. She was, she didn't want too much contact with her different name, and yes. And he started talking to her. He did all the talking. He didn't even notice she didn't say anything. He knew a lot about art, and he talked. One thing she does remember, he said he liked the art, the paintings of Max Liebermann, who was a German impressionist. Shame he was a Jew. She remembered that. She said nothing. She smiled all the time. But he did have a way with him. He was the only man she had another date with. He did have something about him. He wasn't a soldier. He was in Munich on holiday. He had 1 week of holiday left, and they met every day. He was working in Brandenburg in Hitler's aircraft factory. Brandenburg was a city of heavy industry, steel and aircraft, railways, all sorts of things. And he had a week's holiday. And in that time, he was mad. He felt madly in love with her. He was totally smitten. He went home. A week later, she got a telegram. She didn't like that because they're registered. He was coming back, and she was to meet him. So she met him. By then it was October. She remembers taking her hat off. He might not recognize her. Of course he did. She met him at the station. He whisked her away to the museum, to the cafe at the museum, and proposed marriage. He was smitten. She did not want, because you have to register and names are asked and everything. She tried to get out of it. She told him, "Oh, darling, I will love you very much. We'll wait till the war has ended. It's not good to marry in wartime." Everything she could think of. Not a chance. He wanted something, he got it. You don't cross him. His name was Werner. Werner Vetter. And she didn't know what to do. So she leaned forward and she whispered in his ear, "Think about it. I am a Jew and I am living with a false identity." "Oh, that's all right. You told me lies and I told you lies." And she breathed again. He could just as well have gone to the Gestapo. She breathed again. The lies he told were not quite as big as the lies she told. He talked about a little girl, his niece, as his niece was in fact his daughter. He was in divorce proceedings. And the lie she told was life-threatening. He was so smitten, he said it didn't matter at all. So she went with him back to Brandenburg, and they moved in together once his divorce papers had come through. And the SS officer had said that she must go to the Red Cross as a helper, because Hitler was going to have a new law that all women have to work. This was 1942. And there would be a central register, which was dangerous because there were two of the same name. But with the exception of the Red Cross, they would have their own register. So she must go to the Red Cross and become a helper. She did this, and she learnt. Hitler knew what was going to happen. The only thing she learnt was how to bandage people. Arms, legs, heads, torsos. Because he knew there would be many, many casualties. So she went to the local hospital in Brandenburg. I was born. And it was quite good in one way, because she had no ration books for clothing, and her dresses were getting terribly old, and the Red Cross gave her a uniform. So that problem was solved. She was quite pleased. But there was another problem. Always there was a problem. They had a brooch in this uniform to be worn here with a red cross. That didn't worry her. That didn't disturb her. But in the middle of this red cross, there was a swastika. And she could not bring herself to wear this. Now, she was not a nurse. She was a nurse's helpers. And they noticed, and they told her off. Oh, I'm so sorry. I've lost it. I forgot anything she could think of. But it got noticed. And she was in trouble. She was also in trouble because on the station, the accident station, she was too nice to the accidents that came in, they were slave laborers. I mean, obviously, in this heavy industry, there were a lot of accidents. And the men, the slave laborers, Russians, French, Ukrainian, Jews, whatever, had a lot of accidents. She was nice to them. Matron, Nurse Grete, and she got told off. And she was put on another ward. That was nice. It was the maternity ward. The babies were lovely, and she had the babies. It was a happy ward. That's what she needed. But then she began to think. She was 29, and she really wanted a baby. Werner didn't want a baby. He had one daughter already, he didn't like children. But she persuaded him. She had a way about her. And then she fell pregnant. Oh, she was happy. At last she didn't have to work anymore and go to that horrible hospital with all those Aryan nurses. She could stay at home. But Werner decided that he did not want an illegitimate child. Hitler said that this was not right. And he insisted they get married. Oh. So they went to the registry office, and she had to memorize Christa's parents' names and grandparents' names, because it all had to be registered. Again, there was a problem. There was a problem with Christa's mother, who had since died, but she had, her father had brought this woman back from Russia in the First World War, and there were no papers for her. So the registrar said, she could have been a Jew. Again, a brainwave. My mother said, oh, but Russia is the enemy territory. We cannot get those papers. All right, said the registrar. He could see the logic in that. And he looked at my mother, who was exactly diagonally opposite, straight in the face, full in the face, and said, I can see that she wasn't a Jew. I can tell by your face. Said my mother, who is a full Jew all the way back to Adam and Eve, I'm sure of it. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob for certain. The man could see that her mother was not a Jew. It's all in the mind. So they get married. Of course, the wrong name. She got married as Margarete Denner. And Hitler was giving every married couple as a wedding present a copy of his book, Mein Kampf. She's still waiting for it. They had run out of copies. She wants her book, Mein Kampf. She'd read it anyway because she likes to inform. Everything he later did is in that book, she said. Anyway, so they went back, and some grateful person from the hospital had given her a bottle of wine, and she and two friends, they drank a bottle of wine and they were married. Mother was 6 months pregnant already anyway. I was a 6-month baby. And she was at home, and the doctors confirmed the pregnancy. She didn't see another doctor till the day she gave birth. No checkups, nothing. I've had children, and with all the checkups and hospitals and doctors, you still have that tiny, tiny feeling. Sits here. Is it going to have all the fingers and toes? Is my baby going to be all right? She didn't think of that at all. She had one worry. She did not want her baby born on Hitler's birthday, which was the 20th of April. I confirmed that by being born on the 9th of April. Yes, So she had her baby. He wasn't, of course, not part of the birth. It was not usual. So he came and the nurse said, "Oh, Herr Vetter, you are the proud father of a baby girl." A girl? Another girl? Flowers under his arm, and out he marched. He didn't even say anything, didn't even see her. She didn't care. She had her baby. He wrote her a letter of apology. She didn't care. She didn't say anything. She was very, very careful to keep him happy. He could have gone to the Gestapo. Anyway, the aeroplanes, the Americans came over in formation. They were bombing in 1944. At the height of the murders, a Jewish child is born. And that is close to a miracle. She was in the bunker, and he came and he said hello and he apologized, and I don't know. And they went home. She refused all anesthetic, all a cocktail of painkillers, because she was afraid in the wake-up phase she would talk, and she had a big secret to keep. She was so afraid that she gave birth without painkillers. Now, I cannot even imagine what that was like. She also hemorrhaged because she's a small person. I apparently was a very big baby. She took nothing. She said later, it was in all that terror that she lived through, that was the only moment she wanted to die, because the pain was so intense. She said later she gave birth to her child like women in the jungle. Nothing. So she went home and she had her baby. She didn't have to work anymore. Bliss. She was living in the south of the town. She never went into town. She always went into the countryside. She kept him happy. Everything went smoothly. Then he was conscripted. He became an officer. He got a medal for shooting straight. Yes. And then he was on the Eastern Front, and as the Russians came forward, he was captured. She was told, and he must have, outside the house, he must have talked 150% Nazi, because it was unusual that if somebody is captured, they generally got a telegram. An officer came in person. Now, she didn't like this, because every knock at the door, she opened it, could mean the end of her subterfuge. She opened the door, and there was a man, an officer in uniform. She nearly died. Yes. Yes, and her husband had been taken prisoner and was being taken to Siberia. She was quite happy about this, because one thing, he was gone. Secondly, he was safe. So that was all right. Then, the bombing got intense, and when they knew they were coming over Brandenburg, the heavy industry, they got rain bombs. Those left were generally women and children, older people, were evacuated. So they were evacuated, she with the pram, baby in pram, and they were in a village outside, in a barn. They slept on the floor, lots of other women and lots of other children of all ages. And in the morning, she looked at baby. the measles. What? No hospitals, no doctors, no food, nothing. And the other women were terrified. It is so contagious that they threw her out of the barn, which to a degree I can understand. So she and baby, tears streaming, she was desperate. She rang there was only one street in this village, she rang every bell. No, they wouldn't take anyone with the measles. Yes, the last house had a lean-to with an earthen floor. She was allowed to stay there, baby in pram, she on the earthen floor. And she knew from the hospital to keep the child dark, because it can end in blindness and heart problems. It went well. Anyway, they went back into the city. Her flat had been bombed. It was still on fire. It was still hot, so hot. And in the cellar, they all have cellars, and these cellars you could go from one to the other. Hitler had done that already, to be used as a bunker. There was a certain little suitcase with a certain little book, and that book had her real papers pasted into the flyleaf. She had to have that book. Those were her real papers, her real name. Oh, and she tried to get in, and she tried to get in. And then a soldier came past. You know, what are you doing? What is it? She said that it was from her mother. It was a book from her mother, and she had to have it, and she gave some excuse. That soldier went into that hot cellar and got her the book. And she had it. Blessings, wonderful. Then she had to sleep, of course, somewhere else. Everybody was somewhere else. Nobody had any possessions anymore. The Russians moved in, the Russians conquered the 9th of May. They were in the city, raping everybody as is usual. And she was in a home, and there was another young woman in that room, also with a child. And they had forgotten to lock the door. So the Russian soldiers tried the door, it was open, and they were not interested. So she escaped that. Then she heard that her husband was in Siberia. He was sent back in 1947 by the Russians, because by then, post-war, she was working at court. She had all her papers, she'd gone to court, she'd had her name changed, she had a position at court. And she petitioned the Russians again and again, and he was sent back. But when he came back, he discovered he was not the king of the universe anymore. The Russians had used sort of Nazi members to dig roads and clear rubble. He didn't like this. He saw himself as something special. And they didn't get on. We have a phrase that sums it up. They were like chalk and cheese. Totally different. So his first wife had been started badgering him to start again. So they divorced. He went to the West, and he remarried his first wife. It also didn't work. Doesn't work once, it won't work twice. He was gorgeous. He was tall, blonde, blue-eyed. He had a confidence about him. He was engaging. He had charisma. When he died at 90, he was on his 7th wife. He had charisma. Yeah. And his women just didn't stay. I mean, he had too much confidence and too much charisma, and he was violent. When it suited him, he just hit them. And of course they didn't stay. And he couldn't understand. He thought he was perfect. My mother was at court and she was working. Then the KGB, the Russian zone, they were building up the Stasi. the Secret Service. And who did they think of? Edith. So they said to her, we did something for you, now you do something for us. We liberated you, you're a Jew, now you do for us. And they wanted her to spy for them, to inform on certain people, her position at court, etc., etc. And they did not leave her in peace. 6 months, and if they gave her a phone number, they were watching her. 6 months she tried to get out of it. Everything she could think of. I have a small child, and I've got something to do, and I've got work at court, and everything. It didn't work. So she knew she had to, yet again, become a refugee. So she was able to get a visa from the British zone to go. It was the time to go to England. It was the time of the blockade, and the Brits were flying in food into Berlin. And they were flying out with people, and food came in. And she had this visitor's visa to England, and she was so terrified, again, that on that day, she bought a loaf of bread, and she left it in the flat. She had no luggage. She had a briefcase with a pair of panties for me, and I was 4. A spare pair of panties and her documents, nothing else. She was taken to Potsdam by car, by somebody in the court system, and from Potsdam she got the underground system into Berlin. Again, a problem. BEA, the British Airways, were on strike. But she couldn't go back because the Russians were watching her and they would have nabbed her. So what could she do? To get the visa, she had to have a fictional address in the English zone. So she went to this address, number 3, Wielandstraße. And she knocked on the door and she said, hello, here I am. And we have no room for you. She'd never lived there. But we have a couch. You can sit on the couch. So she had to wait for 2 weeks. I mean, she only had the one dress she was stood up in. But her flat was already sealed. The Russians had sealed it already, so there was no possibility. And then one day, officials stood at the door. They had realized that the person who owned this flat, or who rented it, was using an awful lot of electricity. He had, and it wasn't allowed, he had bypassed the meter and got into the main electricity cables. So they came and they sort of inquired, and for him, I think it was a capital offence. And he tried to get out, and my mother had another brainwave. She went up and she said, I'm extra here with my daughter, and my little girl has to have a bath every so often. And that is the reason. So they went away again. Anyway, she was careful. She didn't want an upset with me in the aeroplane, and when she knew she was going to go and the aeroplanes were flying over, she said to me as 4-year-old, we're going to go in that to prepare me. My only problem at 4 years old was, how was I going to get in? And she said, it's like a bus. It'll come down, it's like a bus. You go up the steps, and that was all right. I was happy. We got to London, and I became a little English girl. And I am eternally grateful to my mother that she fled the KGB. She had a career move of judge to housemaid within 3 weeks. Now that is some career move. But a housemaid in freedom was more important than a judge under the KGB. One more word, just one more word. Kirsta, this young woman who risked everything for my mother, to save my mother's life. My mother once read in a book what Simon Wiesenthal had said. He said, we should never forget those who helped. So my mother wrote to Yad Vashem in Jerusalem and told the story, and it was looked at, and all the documents were looked at. Crystal has a tree in the garden of the righteous Gentiles in Jerusalem. She has her name carved in marble that big. And she was given a medal in an olive wood case from Israel. And I am privileged to have known a woman who was prepared to sacrifice her life for the life of another. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you. Thank you. Oh. Thank you. Thank you. Was it good? Okay.
Yes,
Oh,
that was
good.
good.
Okay. Was it all right? Okay.
Was it good, she asked?
Well, I don't know.
Truly amazing. Good afternoon, by the way. I'm a congregant and a big fan of Angela's. I'm Ben Merens, and I've been asked to help us with a Q&A because there are millions of questions that we have not, unfortunately, enough time for all of them. But for those of you who do have questions, where's the mic stand? Somewhere in the back? No, I'll be in the back after I ask my question. And we'll have the chance to ask some questions, and then
Sure.
you're going to sign some books and have some fun.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. I have two requests of you. One is when we get to your question, because Angela's traveled a long way to be with us, if you can think of what your most important question is and be as focused with it as you can, it helps Angela in giving you the answers that she has for you. The other thing that happens when we hear a story like this is it fires up the memory of stories that we have. And while we'd like to share them with Angela, there really isn't time. But for those of you who have stories that you really like to share, when Angela finishes the Q&A, if you want to stay, I'll be glad to moderate a storytelling sort of town hall for the stories you may want to share with us. But we want to let Angela do what she's come here to do, which is share her story. So while I get to the back to the first question I'm going to ask you is this. So Mom had to live a dual identity under intense pressure. How did she maintain her Edith?
She was always Edith inside. She never became Greta inside. She always felt that Greta was a role she played to the outside world and to her husband. He never realized there was another person inside. He met her as Greta. He always knew her as Greta. He didn't want her to be different. He liked the idea of her being a German Hausfrau. And he always called her Greta. One other thing that I will show you all, is my birth certificate. It has a big swastika on it. Mm-hmm. It has his name. It has my name, Maria Angelica Vetter. Maria after Maria Niederau, the first link in the chain to how she was, to her new ID. And she wanted to honor this woman for doing that. Because without Maria, it wouldn't have been possible. It's an odd name for a Jewish child. Yeah? Angelica, because he wanted that. Okay. She couldn't call me Clotilda because she thought her mother was still alive. Of course she wasn't. Her mother had been taken to Mali Trostenetz. It wasn't a concentration camp, it was an extermination camp. She lived exactly 6 days. I don't think about those 6 days. Otherwise, I could not sleep. It has Werner Vetter, who is Lutheran, evangelisch, and Margarete Denner, born Denner. So it's a different name. I have somebody else's name on my birth certificate, not only a swastika. Of course, I don't use this I don't wave this around. Yes. Kirsten was not able to marry because under her name she was already married. So when the war ended, she married her childhood sweetheart. She had a son, Mario, and I call him my almost brother. Well, who else has an almost brother? His mother's name is on my birth certificate, so he's almost my brother. We always have contact. My mother she was so grateful, as am I, to this woman. When I met her, she never talked about it. She didn't want anyone to talk about it. It's an honor to meet somebody like that. But I did want to show you. Yes. I do have other photographs that you can see later. This is Werner, my father, said Nazi officer. And he's not a very nice man. I was so grateful my mother divorced, and he divorced. I would not like to have grown up with him. Yes, he was violent. Now, this is my favorite photograph. My mother, when she was 19, it was a present for her boyfriend, Pepe. And it was done by a photographer. She was very proud that the curls were all her own. She didn't have to go to a hairdresser. And this is us both together before she died. Yeah. I have some other photographs. Please, any questions?
If you have them, come back here. I'll give a mic to you, or raise your hand. I'll try to get to you. Anybody else?
What happened to Pepe? Pepe did survive. He was not on any list. He was sort of a non-person. And his mother got him through with food. Of course, my mother was so disappointed in him. She did not want to marry him. He would have, yes. So he married again. He married post-war. One of the girls who was handing out food because there was such starvation post-war. And it was not a happy marriage. And he did become an alcoholic. He once said to my mother that he was only sober at work. And they always, for as long as he lived, had contact. There was still that feeling. Every 2 years, we went to Vienna. I knew him. I didn't like him. I knew him. She still thought he was wonderful. Yes, that's how people are different. I knew all these people. And then he died. He was a heavy smoker, and he died quite early. He also got very fat, and with all the alcohol. It wasn't nice. I didn't like him. Yes? Oh, yes. Yeah. My mother brought me up in England. I was a little English girl. I learnt English, as you can hear. And I was very happy. She lived in dire poverty because she had no reparation. Austria didn't pay reparation. She had no English. She was a housemaid. Then she made bespoke corsetry, never again anything with law. I didn't realize, I was a happy child. I was much loved. But she kept her story secret. I was over 50 before I knew. And that was a big mistake. She did realize after, maybe she just didn't find the words. Maybe it was too much for her. She did have this post-traumatic stress disorder because of the trauma she had lived through. And she did have episodes, I can remember. She couldn't tell me. I married a German. I went to live in Germany. I didn't have a clue. I was a blue-eyed innocent. And she didn't say anything. That's how it is. I have German children. They all speak English. They're all half English, of course. My mother's documents were kept, all the letters and all the photographs were kept by Pepe. My mother had said, burn everything, it's dangerous. He kept everything. He couldn't bear to part. All the photographs, 800 pieces of paper, the largest file of documents pertaining to one Jew, one in the Nazi era in the world. 800 pieces of paper are now in the American Holocaust Museum, all together for future historians to study, of which I am very pleased. It was her wish that they stay together. She knew. She persuaded Pepe to give them back to her. She had a way of that. And he did. She brought them back to London. She put them somewhere in the house. She can't even remember where. She didn't tell me, and she didn't tell her second husband. He never knew anything about it. In 1956, she married again, and life got better for her. She had a happy marriage of 29 years, after which she went to live in Israel because she wanted to live amongst Jews for once in her life. She was very happy there. At 89, just after this film, she had open heart surgery, and I brought her back to London. I wasn't having her staying there where she can't speak the language. I wanted to, yes, and I became her carer. We were very close. There is a question.
I have a question.
Yes.
I read the book a couple of months ago, and as I recall, I thought that when your mother told him that she was Jewish, that he said way back there was some Jewish history in his family.
No.
There
No.
wasn't?
No. He was German, Aryan, again back to Adam and Eve.
I thought there was some great-grandparent that was Jewish.
No. No. There wasn't. He was complete and utter Aryan. He was a member of the Nazi Party. We didn't have his Nazi Party card. The Holocaust Museum had his Nazi Party card. That's how we know what it looks like. I have a photograph of it. Yeah.
Do you know what happened to Gretel, the little girl that you left
Yes.
behind in Brandenburg?
Crystal, she, the girl who gave her the name, she sadly died at 70 because she had a triple heart bypass and she didn't really recover. She was also a heavy smoker, as everyone was there. She died quite early.
Does any of his family, do you have any contact with any? Do they know you exist even?
With his family, Werner? No. He didn't want contact with any of his family. There was no family involved at all. And I didn't particularly want contact with him either. Yes, because he tended to be violent. When I was 16, my mother had this bright idea of sending me to live with my father for 6 months and go to school there. I think of course, the perfect teenager. I don't think she saw it that way. And she wanted a bit of peace and quiet. So she sent me, and I was quite happy to go. It was my big adventure. I knew nothing, absolutely nothing. And I crossed him. I asked him, when I went to go to school, not to go to religious education classes. Not because I didn't want to hear about the religion, but I didn't know what Christian education classes involved. I'd never been. And he didn't want to turn up with a Jewish child, so he whacked me one. Hard. I had a dislocated jaw and had to be operated. I still have problems. So I didn't like him very much. He can't expect to be liked after that.
Yes.
Where?
When your mother was proposed to, and she mentioned to him that she was Jewish, I'm not clear. What was his reaction?
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the question.
What was the reaction? Can you tell a bit more about when your mother admitted her Judaism to Werner? How did he respond, and why did she take such a risk?
That's what I wanted to know. Why did she tell him? Does he have to know everything? I said, did he have to know? For goodness sake, everyone has secrets. She said, it was her form of honesty, her integrity. She could not go with him if he did not know. She took the risk. I said it wasn't necessary. She said for her it was necessary. She had to take the risk. But she was quite sure that he would be okay. I don't know how sure she was.
Thank you for being here and sharing your story.
Yeah.
The day that you found out that your mother told you about your history, how did that change your life from that moment on?
Totally. I was shattered. How could I live with this woman for over 50 years and not know something so important? The way I saw myself, the way I saw my surroundings. I was living in Germany. The way I saw my surroundings, it changed everything. I mean, I was totally shattered. When I sort of recovered, it took a while, I began to realize that we are all very dependent on our surroundings. That one has to work with the surroundings. My freedoms are only guaranteed by those people who stand up for my freedoms. As a teenager, I thought the world began with me, arrogant as I was. And I realized that this is not the case. I am dependent on you, as you, everyone, are dependent on me looking after your freedoms. And this goes for every community, every single person. My grandmother was 51 years old. All she ever wanted in life was to hold a grandchild. And she was not allowed by the society she lived in. She was helpless. And that's what I realized. That's what I learned out of all this.
I have a question here.
Yeah.
Yes. When you, after the war and you went to England, did you have any sort of Jewish education?
Oh, yes.
What did your mother admit to? I mean, you knew you were Jewish?
I went to a Jewish school.
Okay.
She sent me to a Jewish school. It was an Orthodox school. Not Haredi, but Orthodox. Oh, yes. Absolutely. She didn't want any else. That was what she was comfortable with. And I liked it. So I learned all about the festivals, and I learned Hebrew. I started at 5. I learned English. I had German. I learned Hebrew. It was wonderful. I enjoyed it. And I carried on the Cheder classes till I was 16. I learned Talmud. I read Rashi. It was wonderful. And being Jewish is as natural as breathing. I never think about it. And it's great. My children, it's great. My middle son made Aliyah, and his children, my grandchildren, Edith and Esther, they go to a Jewish school. So, Mr. Hitler, you didn't win.
Angela, we have time for one more question right over here.
Yes.
Did your mother ever share with you, having narrowly escaped so many times with so few possessions, what the most important thing to bring with her or with you throughout
Yes.
your life?
Me. Yes? Possessions, things, items were never that important. She was also a woman who never complained. She had experienced when she was young that the aunties, they came from a very big family. Her father was the youngest of 9, as was usual. Her aunties had come to afternoon tea. They'd complained about the headaches and the doctors they went to and the backache, and they complained. And she saw that when Hitler came, all of a sudden, these people were not complaining anymore. They didn't have a backache. So the good years they'd made bad for themselves with this constant complaining. And she said she would never do that. I never heard her say, oh, it's raining, isn't it terrible? Or the snow is so cold. Never. I never heard her complain. Things were not important. People were always important. And I was the most important. Of course.
Well, we thank Angela so very much. I think that was an extraordinarily significant way to close. If you don't mind my saying, Angela, we learned this past Shabbat that this is precisely the time of Angela's mother's yahrzeit.
Yes, it is.
So to have said Kaddish in our congregation for her is significant, particularly because you have in so many ways enunciated how precious you are in her life and always still. The fact that it is her yahrzeit today, or this period of time, perhaps signifies that she certainly is still with you.
Yeah, definitely.
And the Kaddish affirms magnified and sanctified be life. That's what Yid Gadal V'Yikadash means. Magnified and sanctified be life. She would be proud of you because you're affirming life by telling her story.
Thank you. Thank you. That's nice. Thank you.
And before we let Angela off the stage and let her sit down out there and have a bite to eat and visit with her, I'd like to introduce one more person to you. He has become a friend of mine personally. He's a friend of all of ours because of the work that he does. So when we say the phrase, we shall never forget, it's how do we remember, and it's through the knowledge and education of the Holocaust Education Resource Center, the executive director and co-sponsor of today's event, Dr. Shai Pilner. Shai.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ben. Angela, thank you so much for coming here. It's a pleasure getting to know you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. I would like to invite you to learn more about the Nathan and Esther Peltz Holocaust Education Resource Center and join our events, come to our lectures, book club, and come to our films. Let me thank all the wonderful people who worked tirelessly on this program. For us, for our organization, this is a unique program. We are going to send Angela tomorrow to Temple Beth Eli in Madison, and on Tuesday she's going to speak at the Neville Museum in Green Bay. We would really like Angela's story to be heard across the state. This is the mission of HERC. We would like students and the young people to remember not only the story of the survivors, but also the story of the victims, those who were unlucky to come and share with us their experiences. So a huge thank you, please, applause, goes to Carrie Altman. She's my co-chair, but I have to say, I am a paid employee and she's a volunteer, so she deserves the applause. Thank you so much. And I also want to thank our sponsors. Susie Ettinger, thank you very much. I would like to thank Bev Greenberg, who is she's the chair-elect of HERC, the Holocaust Education Resource Center, and your husband, Marty. I would also like to thank another sponsor, Betty Krustowski, who is our dear chair, and also Eileen and Bernie Stoller. Let me thank the Shalom staff, Rabbi Ron Shapiro. Let me thank Rabbi Marcy Rosenbaum, Rabbi Noah Chertakov, and Kenter Karen Berman, and also our president, Linda Berlin. Is there anything I forgot? And of course, Abby. And Linda Hollyfield, and of course, I am Abby Habesh Schroeder, who also worked tirelessly on this event. And lastly, Ben Merens, thank you so much. He was our moderator, and I hope to see you in the future. Thank you for this enjoyable and important evening. Thanks.
A reminder, it's a Jewish event in part, so there's food. And there are books if you'd like to support the effort and the education. They can be signed for you, and you can meet Angela as well.